Today, we are going to learn about the prepositions of movement. Let's start with the prepositions of movement, to and from. Most English prepositions have several different functions. Also, different prepositions can have very similar uses. Often, the correct preposition cannot be guessed, and you will just have to learn them a few at a time. So, the first one for today is to. You use to when indicating destination. For example, he travels to work by bus. The preposition from indicates the place or direction from which somebody or something starts. For example, how do I get to the bank from here? Let's move on from here to prepositions of movement into in and out of. Be careful. There is a difference between in and into. In refers to a location or a position, whereas into indicates movement. For example, she was getting out of the car and going into the hotel. If we look at the example again, we can also see the preposition out of. Out of also indicates movement and is used when you leave a place. For example, I was coming out of the cinema when I saw Mary waiting to go in. Let's now look at the prepositions of movement on and off. If someone or something is on a surface or object, the surface or object is immediately below them and supporting their weight. And off is the opposite of on. When something is taken off something else, it is no longer on it. Look at this example. Take your shoes off the table and put them on the floor. And now it's time for the prepositions of movement, up and down. If someone or something goes up, they move away from the ground or to a higher position. And if someone or something goes down, they go towards the ground or to a lower level. Look at this example. I always go up the stairs and come down the lift to keep fit. Now, let's look at the prepositions of movement over and under. If one thing is over another thing, it means that it is in a position above or higher than it. For example, ladies and gentlemen, we are now flying over the Pyrenees. And under is the opposite of over. If you go under something, you move to a lower position or place with respect to something else that would be over you. For example, I love lying under the trees in the summer. Are you ready for the prepositions of movement through and across? To move across something means to go from one side of a place or boundary to another. And to move through something means to move from in one side of something to out the other side of that something. Look at this example. Every Sunday, we walk across the bridge and through the park. We'll look at 3 more prepositions today. The prepositions of movement, along, round, and past. If you move or look along something, such as a road, you move or look towards the end of it. For example, you will need to drive along this road to the football stadium. To move round a place means to go along its edge in a circular direction, back towards your starting point. For example, the moon travels round the earth every 28 days. And finally, past. If something is past a place, it means it is beyond or further than that place. For example, go past the supermarket and it's on the left. Well, in this class, you have revised the grammar in Unit 78 of our complete course and learned about the prepositions of movement. Enjoy Unit 78 and meet Victor and Mike. Find out how complicated it is to get to Victor's new flat.
Today, we're going to learn about the verbs of the senses. There are 6 verbs of the senses. Can you guess what they are? Look, smell, taste, sound, feel, and sing. These verbs are very important because of how often they are used. Normally, when using a verb of the senses, we place an adjective after the verb instead of an adverb. Let's look at some examples of how to use verbs of the senses, followed by adjectives. These shoes seem expensive. What do you think? As you can see, seem is the verb, and it is followed by the adjective expensive. Let's take a look at a few more examples. Make sure to notice the adjective after the verb. You don't seem very happy. Do you feel ill? That drawing looks okay. Why do you want to change it? These biscuits taste delicious. Did you make them yourself? Her perfume always smells wonderful. His last record sounds great. The kids feel sick after so much ice cream. This makes sense, doesn't it? Now let's look at how to use of with taste and smell. The verbs taste and smell can also be followed by of and a noun, like this. Be careful, it smells of petrol in here. This cocktail tastes of coffee. We can also make comparisons by using the verbs of the senses. Let's take a look at how to use like with verbs of the senses. The verbs of the senses can also be combined with the word like to make comparisons. Let's see a few examples of how to use the word like when making comparisons. Janet looks like her mother when she was younger. My hair looks like a bird's nest. The bread tastes like my mother used to make it. That sounds like George coming home. This tie feels like silk. How much does it cost? Do you feel like pizza? To feel means to experience a particular emotion or physical sensation. The expression feels like is used a lot in English, and it means to want to do something. So if I ask you, do you feel like pizza? I want to know if you want to have pizza. To feel like is also used when we have a sensation or an impression of something. As in the example, this tie feels like silk. Well, in this class you have revised the grammar in Unit 79 of our complete course and learned about the verbs of the sentences. Enjoy Unit 79 and meet Sally, Wendy, Jim, and Len. Who do you think is going to win in dominoes? The boys or the girls?
Today, you're going to learn how to use comparative adjectives. Let's begin by looking at how to form comparatives of one-syllable adjectives. To make the comparative form of a one-syllable adjective, we add er. For example, the comparative form of tall is taller. After comparatives, we use the conjunction than. So we say taller than. Let's see an example. Jane is 1 meter 65 and Claire is 1 meter 60. Jane is taller than Claire. Let's see more examples of one-syllable adjectives. Let's start with the adjective short. Its comparative form is shorter than. Big, bigger than. Notice that we have doubled the G because big is a one-syllable adjective that ends in a consonant, preceded by a vowel. Small, smaller than. Old, older than. Young, younger than. Rich, richer than. Nice, nicer than. Poor, poorer than. Let's see example sentences. Jane is nice, but Claire is very nice. Claire is nicer than Jane. Jane is 18 and Claire is 20. Claire is older than Jane. Let's move on to two-syllable adjectives ending in Y. There are many common adjectives that end in Y. For example, the adjective pretty. And its comparative form is prettier than. As you can see, we change the Y to an I and then add ER. Funny, funnier than. Silly, sillier than. Dirty, dirtier than. Now, let's learn how to form comparatives of longer adjectives. With two or more syllable adjectives that do not end in Y, we cannot add ER and use the adverb more. Look at an example of this. The adjective expensive and its comparative form, more expensive. Have I forgotten something? Remember to use the conjunction than. Comfortable, more comfortable than. Interesting, more interesting than. Dangerous, more dangerous than. When we want to express the idea of not so much, we use the adverb less instead of more. My car is more comfortable than your car. Your car is less comfortable than my car. Football is more dangerous than tennis. Tennis is less dangerous than football. Let's now see three adjectives which have irregular comparatives. Let's now see three adjectives which have irregular comparative forms. Good, better than. Bad, worse than. Far, farther, further than. Have a look at these examples. My English is better than my French. The weather in England is worse than in Spain. Your house is farther from Frankfurt than mine. We use both farther and further to talk about distance, and they mean the same. So you can also say, Your house is farther from Frankfurt than mine. However, we can also use further but not farther to mean extra or additional. Look at this example. Do you need any further information? Well, in this class, you've revised the grammar in Unit 80 of our complete course and learned how to form comparative adjectives. Enjoy Unit 80 and meet Rose and Ethel. Who is Edward?
In the last lesson, we learned about comparative adjectives. Today, we're going to learn about other comparatives. Let's start with comparisons with as. We use the structure as, adjective as, to say that two people or things are equal in some way. For example, are you as fast as your brother? In the mountain, I felt as free as a bird. When I saw him, he was as tall as his father. This structure can also be used in negative sentences. Look, the weather in England is not as good as in Spain. With this sentence, we are saying that the weather in Spain is better than the weather in England. What's the weather like in your country? Is it as good as in Spain? Now, let's look at comparatives with the. We can use comparatives with the to say that things change or vary together. Look at these examples with the more and the less. The more I know you, the more I like you. The more I water the flowers, the less beautiful they are. The more you study English, the more you learn. So, let me continue teaching you more English. Let's revise comparatives with ER. As you saw in the previous unit, 80, we form the comparatives of one-syllable adjectives by adding ER. For example, the comparative of short is shorter. So we can say Henry is shorter than his father. Remember to use than in comparative sentences. Look at these other examples. The Arctic is warmer than the Atlantic. London is safer than New York. The Jumbo is slower than the Concorde. The Pyrenees are lower than the Himalayas. Finally, let's look at some examples of other comparatives. The film wasn't as good as the book. Henry isn't as tall as his father. The more I practice English, the fewer mistakes I make. The more I see her, the more I like her. The more water I drink, the healthier I get. The more I work, the less time I have to be with my children. The more I play tennis, the better I feel. Now, your English is surely better than it was before this unit. Well, in this class, you have revised the grammar of Unit 81 of our complete course and learned about other comparatives. Enjoy Unit 81 and meet Nick and Dennis. Find out if it's better to live in the country or in the city.
Today, we're going to learn about the superlative adjectives. Let's start with one-syllable adjectives in the superlative form. Remember that in Unit 80, you learned about the comparative adjectives. For example, long, longer. With the superlative, the endings are different. The superlative form of one-syllable adjectives normally ends in est. For example, long, longest. And before superlatives, we use the definite article the. So we say the longest. Let's look at some examples of one-syllable adjectives. Superlative form. Jane is 18. Claire is 20. and Sarah is 22. Jane is the youngest, and Sarah is the oldest. Jim won the race in 12 seconds. Frank was second with 13 and a half seconds. Dennis was third with 14 seconds. Jim was the fastest, and Dennis was the slowest. Now, let's look at two syllable adjectives ending in Y in the superlative form. Two syllable adjectives ending in Y, which are very common, have a superlative form ending in I-E-S-T. For example, pretty, the prettiest. Notice that you need to change the Y to an I before adding E-S-T. Okay, let's see more examples. Funny, the funniest. Silly, the silliest. Dirty, the dirtiest. Now, let's move on. Let's look at longer adjectives, superlative form. So, with two syllable adjectives, not ending in Y, and with longer adjectives of 3 syllables or more, we use the adverb most. For example, expensive, the most expensive. Comfortable, the most comfortable. Interesting, the most interesting. Dangerous, the most dangerous. Note that in contrast, when we want to express the idea of not so much, we use the least instead of the most. The least is the opposite of the most. For example, apples are the least expensive. Arabic, Chinese, and Greek are difficult languages, but Greek is the least difficult. One more thing before we finish. I will teach you the irregular comparative and superlative forms. Let's look at the adjectives, the comparative form, and the superlative form. Good, better than, the best. Bad, worse than, the worst. Far, further than or farther than, the furthest or the farthest. I will show you some examples. Miguel Indurain was the best cyclist in the world. I am the worst singer in my family. There are not many, and you just need to memorize them. Well, in this class, we have revised the grammar in Unit 82 of our complete course and learn how to form superlative adjectives. Enjoy Unit 82 and meet Valerie and Tanya. Find out their very different taste in boys.